Shanghai, 1932. The city burned. Streets reeked of smoke and sweat. Japanese soldiers stormed houses, dragging girls by the wrists. Promises of factory jobs turned into locked doors. The first comfort stations opened in alleys still wet with blood. Women sat on straw mats, listening to boots outside. Each step meant another man. Some were 14, some younger. They learned quickly. Resistance brought fists. Compliance brought silence. Nanjing, 1937. The river ran red. Survivors of the massacre were marched into brothels. The army called it discipline. The women called it endless. Diaries captured the arithmetic. 3 soldiers, 5 soldiers, 10 soldiers in one night. The empire gave the system a name, Ianfu, comfort women. Reports spoke of regulations, sanitation, rotation. Words that masked what soldiers knew and women endured. Burma, 1942. Bamboo shacks, tin roofs, jungle heat. Allied prisoners later found logbooks. One page read, average 20 soldiers per woman per day. The numbers were neat. The bodies were broken. The logic was mechanical. Illness meant replacement. Pregnancy meant abortion. Escape meant execution. Women became consumables, as replaceable as bullets or boots. Yet the empire told its men another story. Propaganda said the women were volunteers, even fortunate. Soldiers wrote letters home. We are well supplied. No mention of the fear behind the walls. By 1945, the system stretched from Manchuria to the Pacific Islands. Tens of thousands of women moved like cargo across borders. One Japanese officer testified later, they were not willing. They were forced. Everyone knew it. The war had turned their lives into ledgers. Each entry a number, each number a wound. Singapore, 1942. The city fell in days. Women were herded into trucks, told they would work in kitchens. Instead, they were locked in rows of shophouses, windows barred, guards at the door. The first night never ended. American prisoners later remembered the sounds. Screams carried through thin walls. Boots in the corridor, metal trays banging shut. One diary entry. 20 soldiers lined outside, women taken inside one by one. Silence after. Burma, 1943. Allied patrols raided an abandoned station. Inside they found bamboo cots, torn sheets, medical kits still open. On the wall, a schedule. Inspections every week, ration lines marked in chalk. Cold proof of a warm hell. A captured officer admitted, the army ordered it. It was not private, it was regulation. The arithmetic grew monstrous. In one camp, 40 women, 600 soldiers. Rotation meant exhaustion. Disease spread faster than medicine. Army doctors noted infection rates above 70%. Luzon, 1944. Japanese units retreating through the Philippines dragged women with them. Villagers saw columns pass, soldiers with rifles, women with empty eyes. Few ever came back. By the end of the year, the system stretched across Asia and the Pacific. From Shanghai to New Guinea, tens of thousands of women, some transported by train, others by ship. One Allied report described them as cargo without manifest. Each station left the same trail, cots, logbooks, silence. The empire had built a network of fear, hidden in plain sight. Manchuria, 1944. Trains rattled north. In the cars, supplies, ammunition, and women. Some still believed they were being taken to factories. Guards laughed. At the stations, the truth was revealed. One survivor later said, they locked us in a wooden house. 10 men came the first night. I lost count after that. Guam, 1944. U.S. Marines advancing through the jungle found huts abandoned in haste. Inside, torn bedding, bottles of disinfectant, ledgers stamped with Army seals. One entry read, average service, 20 soldiers daily. A Marine wrote in his diary, the smell was everywhere. Sweat, blood, rot. We didn't need orders to know what had happened. Okinawa, 1945. As fighting closed in, Japanese officers forced women deeper into caves. Some were shot to prevent capture. Others left behind, starving. A chaplain who entered days later wrote, "We gave water. They did not believe it. One woman touched the cup as if it was a trick." The arithmetic was relentless. Army doctors reported infection rates above 70%. In some units, replacement was every 3 months, bodies treated as consumables like rifles or rations. By summer 1945, the network stretched from China to the Pacific Islands. Allied translators gathered testimony, compiling ATIS report number 120. One page read simply, "Compulsory. Escape impossible. Resistance punished." The Empire had built its system with precision: schedules, inspections, quotas, words on paper. But behind each line was a body, and behind each number, a broken life. Shanghai, 1932. Smoke drifted through the streets after the fighting. Soldiers marched with rifles slung low, boots slapping wet stone. Behind shuttered houses, a new kind of camp appeared. The first comfort stations. Girls arrived in carts, told they would sew or cook. Doors shut, windows barred. The air inside smelled of sweat and kerosene. Straw mats on the floor, one bucket in the corner. Each evening, the sound of boots in the corridor. One by one, men entered. Some women screamed the first night. Others fell silent after the third, after the fifth. Resistance meant fists, or worse. A Japanese officer recorded in his diary, "They are rotated daily. Inspections every week. No refusal permitted." The arithmetic began small. 10 soldiers one night, 15 the next. Within weeks, the numbers doubled. Schedules were written on scraps of paper, tacked to the wall. The women became columns in a ledger. One survivor recalled, "We thought the war was outside, but the war came into our bodies. Every day, another uniform, another face." By the end of the year, Shanghai's alleys hid dozens of stations. Soldiers lined up after patrols. Civilians passed without looking. The Empire had turned entire neighborhoods into machinery. What began as an experiment in Shanghai would spread to Nanjing, to Burma, to the islands of the Pacific. The system had found its shape: deception, confinement, routine. Nanjing, December 1937. The river stank of bodies. Houses burned, glass shattered under boots. Survivors of the massacre, women pulled from alleys, daughters dragged from hiding places, were marched into barracks. The first night, the lines formed. Soldiers queued in silence, rifles leaning against the wall. Inside, women crouched on mats, their hands trembling, breath clouding in the winter air. The doors slammed, one after another. An Allied interrogation, years later, summarized with cold detachment. 10 to 20 soldiers per woman per night, resistance punished immediately, pregnancy terminated. The arithmetic was brutal. A woman barely 15, forced 10 times in one night, 300 in a month. Army doctors inspected them weekly, chalking infection rates on blackboards as if counting bullets. One captured soldier admitted it was not voluntary. Everyone knew, but orders were orders. A Korean survivor taken to Nanjing recalled, "We were told to keep quiet. If we cried, they hit us. If we fainted, they poured water and continued." The smell of kerosene lamps, the iron taste of blood, the thud of boots in the hallway. These became the rhythm of survival. By early 1938, Nanjing had dozens of stations, hidden behind ordinary storefronts. Neighbors pretended not to hear. Newspapers reported discipline and control. The truth rotted behind locked doors. The Empire had perfected its model: deception, confinement, inspection, replacement. A machine that consumed women the way it consumed ammunition. Burma, 1942. The jungle steamed. Bamboo huts stood in rows, roofs patched with tin. Inside, cots lined the walls. Girls from Korea, China, the Philippines sat in silence, their eyes swollen, their bodies thin. Allied patrols later found the place abandoned. Logbooks lay open, ink smeared by rain. One entry read, "Average service, 20 soldiers per woman per day. Replacements every 3 months." A U.S. officer who walked through the huts wrote, "The smell clung to everything: sweat, blood, disinfectant. The cots were still warm when we arrived. On the floor, a child's sandal, too small for the numbers in the ledger. Luzon, 1944. Villagers watched Japanese columns retreat into the hills. Behind the soldiers came trucks filled with women. Dust clung to their hair, their feet dragged in the mud. Few ever returned. One Filipino farmer remembered. They stared straight ahead. Their eyes were empty. We wanted to help, but rifles pointed at us. Okinawa, 1945. The war closing in. Officers forced women into caves deeper and deeper. Some were shot to prevent capture. Others left starving in the dark. A chaplain who entered days later recalled, "We offered water. One woman touched the cup as if it were a trick. She did not believe kindness was real." By the summer of 1945, the system stretched from Manchuria to the Pacific Islands. Reports collected by the Allied Translator and Interpreter Section, ATIS Report Number 120, noted the same pattern everywhere. Compulsory. Escape impossible. Resistance punished. Different countries. Different languages. The same silence behind doors. Luzon, spring 1945. The doors splintered under rifle butts. Women flinched, bracing for blows. For months they had been told, "The Americans will kill you, cut you, burn you alive." Instead, soldiers lowered their weapons. A canteen was lifted. Water poured into a dented cup. One woman stared, too afraid to drink. A medic knelt, holding her wrist as if it might snap. The woman's pulse barely beat beneath skin stretched tight over bone. A GI tore open a K-ration pack. Biscuits. A tin of ham and eggs. A chocolate bar. He placed them in trembling hands. For seconds, no one moved. Then teeth broke the biscuit. Silence cracked with chewing. One U.S. chaplain wrote later, "They did not believe we came to help. Their eyes searched us for tricks. When they tasted chocolate, some began to cry." Manila, 1945. Allied officers filed reports. Women weighed less than 90 pounds. Infection rates over 70%, many unable to stand. The paperwork was clinical, but the scene was not. Cots lined the floors, bodies wrapped in thin blankets, the air thick with disinfectant and fear. A survivor remembered, "They gave us water. We thought it was poison. Only when they drank first did we believe." Burma, 1945. A patrol found bamboo huts still warm. Women inside stared at the ground, lips cracked, skin raw. Marines handed out cigarettes and chewing gum. Some refused, certain it was a trick. Others took them with shaking hands. The arithmetic of liberation was brutal. Hundreds freed, thousands still hidden, tens of thousands uncounted. Every mile the Allies advanced, another station surfaced. Proof written not in ink, but in bodies. China, summer 1945. In Nanjing, American patrols entered abandoned compounds. The smell hit first: sweat, urine, kerosene. Women crouched against walls, their hair matted, their skin covered in sores. They did not run. They did not speak. One officer wrote in his notebook, "They looked at us as if we were another set of guards. When we lowered our rifles, they did not believe it." Soldiers brought rice, canned milk, quinine. The women took nothing until the officers ate first. Only then did they touch the food, lifting it to their lips like a dangerous experiment. Korea, August 1945. At the ports of Busan and Incheon, ships unloaded not just soldiers, but captives. Lines of women stepped ashore barefoot, carrying nothing. Some limped, others leaned on strangers. Families crowded the piers, scanning faces. Tears, embraces, but also whispers. Some relatives turned away. A survivor recalled, "My mother wept. My brother told me not to come inside. They said I was shamed forever." Shanghai, 1945. Allied medics set up makeshift wards in schools and churches. Dozens of women lay on cots, intravenous drips feeding into thin arms. Records noted malaria, dysentery, advanced syphilis. The language of the files was clinical. The reality was unbearable. A nurse later wrote, "We bathed them like children. Some weighed less than 80 pounds. When we gave them blankets, they clutched them as if they were gold." The arithmetic of return grew larger each week. dozens in one camp, hundreds in a port city, thousands across Asia. Yet compared to the scale of the system, it was fragments. For every woman seen, many more remained uncounted. Autumn 1945, Korea. The piers at Incheon were crowded. Ships unloaded lines of returnees, soldiers, laborers, prisoners. Among them, women stepped barefoot onto the docks. Some carried rags tied as bundles. Others carried nothing at all. Families scanned the faces. Some ran forward, embracing daughters with tears. Others turned away. Whispers followed the women down the pier. A survivor recalled, "My family cried when they saw me, but they never asked. Not once. It was as if they wanted me alive, but my story dead." Japan, 1945. Allied headquarters filed reports. Women malnourished, many infertile, most with untreated infections. Numbers were noted, charts drawn, categories marked. Venereal disease, weight under 90 pounds, psychological collapse. The paperwork was precise, the reality chaotic. An American officer wrote, "They avoided questions. They bowed their heads and said nothing. Few would speak." Philippines, 1945. In Manila, U.S. chaplains found survivors in a schoolhouse-turned ward. Blankets lined the floor. The women clutched cups of water, staring at the walls. A chaplain's diary read, "We tried to pray with them. Some closed their eyes, others flinched when we touched their hands." By late 1945, the first repatriation camps opened. Women waited in long queues for transport, trains to Korea, ships to Taiwan, trucks to villages. They stepped off into homes that often did not welcome them. Silence met them more often than words. One survivor said, "The war ended for everyone else. For us, it never ended. We carried it inside." The arithmetic of return was staggering. Hundreds through one port, thousands across Asia. But behind every number was the same scene. Women standing at thresholds, families divided between embrace and rejection. The empire had collapsed. The stations were gone. But the war inside the women had only begun. September 1945, Yokohama. Allied doctors opened the doors of a former army barracks. Inside, rows of women lay on cots. Bandages stained brown, skin pale under thin blankets. The air smelled of iodine and damp wood. A U.S. Army medic wrote, "They weighed less than 90 pounds. Some could not stand. Many were sick with syphilis, gonorrhea, malaria. We treated them like casualties of battle." Tokyo, 1945. Interrogations began. Translators questioned the women through layers of silence. Some shook their heads, others whispered single words. Taken, beaten, never free. Their voices cracked, then stopped. The paperwork was cold. ATS report. Number 120 listed regulations. Medical inspections weekly. Resistance punished. Escape impossible. The language was precise, almost bureaucratic. The women sat nearby, staring at the floor, each word confirming what their bodies already carried. Manila, 1945. Nurses spoon-fed broth into trembling hands. The women clutched tin cups as if they were weapons. A chaplain described, "When we prayed, they cried. When we touched their shoulders, they flinched. They expected fists, not comfort." The arithmetic of survival filled the ledgers. 50 women in one ward, 200 in another, thousands across Asia. Each number attached to a body, each body marked by years of use. But Allied reports ended at the threshold. They recorded disease, weight, mortality. They did not record shame, silence, or fear of returning home. Those details lived only in the women's eyes and in the silence that followed every question. December 1945. Incheon. The harbor froze in gray mist. Ships unloaded columns of returnees, soldiers in tattered uniforms, laborers with hollow cheeks, and women wrapped in borrowed coats. They stepped onto the pier barefoot, carrying nothing but silence. Families crowded the docks. Some cried and embraced, others turned away. Whispers carried in the cold air. A survivor later said, "My mother hugged me. My brother would not look at me. He told me not to enter the house." Seoul, 1946. U.S. occupation reports listed the returnees, numbers, weights, diseases. The words were clinical. Venereal infections common, malnutrition severe, fertility impaired. The women became entries in medical files, their trauma measured in pounds and percentages. Tokyo, 1946. In the War Crimes Tribunal, prosecutors introduced evidence. Captured orders described the system. Comfort stations, rotation schedules, medical inspections. Judges nodded, then turned to larger charges, invasions, massacres, crimes against peace. The women's suffering was a footnote. A U.S. legal officer wrote in his diary, "Comfort stations mentioned, but not pursued, overshadowed by other crimes." Manila, 1946. In a converted schoolhouse, nurses dressed wounds that never healed. Women lay on straw mats, their bodies weak, their eyes fixed on ceilings. A chaplain described, "They feared going home more than dying. To them, silence was safer than return." The arithmetic of return filled ledgers again. Dozens on one ship, hundreds in one port, thousands scattered across Asia. Yet in homes, the numbers vanished. Few spoke of them, few asked. The empire was gone. The courts passed judgment. But the women carried sentences of another kind. Stigma without trial, shame without crime. 1947. Korea. The repatriation camps closed. Barbed wire came down. Ships stopped sailing. Women walked back to villages carrying bundles no heavier than a child's toy. Their eyes stayed on the ground. Neighbors stared as they passed. One survivor remembered, "They asked me nothing. They gave me food, but no words." Silence was heavier than hunger. Japan, 1947. Allied headquarters filed their final reports. Numbers were tallied, pages stamped. The comfort women system appeared in appendices, between lines on labor camps and military rations. Bureaucratic language swallowed human screams. A translator noted privately, "The documents are clear, but no one will pursue them further." Philippines, 1948. Survivors worked as laundresses, maids, vendors. Some raised children alone. They avoided priests, avoided questions, avoided neighbors. One woman later said, "I lived, but not as myself. I was a shadow in daylight." Tokyo, 1948. The tribunal ended. Generals were sentenced, some hanged. Comfort stations were mentioned in evidence, but not in judgment. In the newspapers, the word disappeared. Headlines spoke of democracy, industry, rebuilding. The women's story dissolved into silence. Seoul, 1949. New wars loomed, borders hardened, villages split. Survivors hid deeper, fearing shame more than bombs. Families told daughters, "Never speak, never confess." The war outside had ended. The war inside had not. The arithmetic of forgetting was swift. By the end of the 1940s, hundreds of thousands of women had returned. But in official memory, they were reduced to a few pages in archives, a few lines in reports. The empire was gone. The world moved on. The women remained silent in homes, silent in churches, silent in statistics. Their bodies free, their voices still captive. Autumn 1945, Korea. The ships docked at Incheon. Women stepped onto the pier barefoot, their clothes hanging loose on thin frames. Families rushed forward, some cried and embraced, others turned away. Whispers followed louder than greetings. One survivor remembered, "My mother hugged me. My brother told me to stay outside. They saw me alive, but not as a daughter." Seoul, 1945. U.S. occupation medics recorded the bodies. Weight under 90 pounds. Infection rates above 70%, many infertile. The reports listed numbers, not names. To the files, they were statistics, not stories. Tokyo, 1946. At the War Crimes Tribunal, prosecutors presented evidence. Orders, schedules, inspections. The words "comfort station" entered the record. Judges nodded and moved on to invasions, massacres, atomic fire. The women's suffering passed in silence. A legal officer wrote in his diary, "Mentioned, but not pursued. Overshadowed by larger crimes." Manila, 1946. Nurses spoon-fed broth to women lying on mats. the smell of disinfectant mixed with sweat. Some wept when hands touched their shoulders. Others flinched. A chaplain described, "They feared kindness as if it were another trick." The arithmetic of liberation turned into arithmetic of forgetting. Dozens in one ward, hundreds in one camp, thousands across Asia. Reports ended. Silence began. 1947, Korea. The repatriation camps closed. Women walked back to villages carrying bundles no larger than a child's toy. Neighbors stared, families lowered their eyes. A survivor recalled, "I returned alive, but they treated me like I was already dead. They gave me food, but no words." 1948, Seoul. Allied files were boxed and stored. The words "comfort station" appeared in appendices, buried between pages on labor battalions and supply chains. Bureaucracy replaced testimony. A translator later admitted, "The evidence was there. No one wanted to read it." 1950. Korea at war again. The peninsula burned, villages emptied, families fled south, borders split. Survivors of the first war now faced a second. Some were displaced twice, first by the empire, then by their own land. A woman said decades later, "The first war broke my body. The second broke my home." 1954. Manila. U.S. Army medical surveys noted high rates of venereal disease among displaced women. The phrase "former comfort women" appeared once in a footnote. A life reduced to a line in a report. One Filipino survivor recalled, "We were statistics. We were never names." The arithmetic was relentless. Dozens erased in ledgers, hundreds ignored in tribunals, thousands silenced in homes. By the mid-1950s, the war was a memory for nations, but still a wound for the women. 60. Seoul. Crowds filled the streets, students chanting against dictatorship. Survivors watched from alleys. They had endured another kind of war, but their voices stayed hidden. Shame was heavier than banners. A Korean woman later recalled, "They shouted for freedom. I could not shout for mine." 1965. Tokyo, Seoul. A treaty was signed, reparations agreed, billions of yen exchanged. History rewritten in diplomatic language. No article mentioned the women. The documents closed the subject before it was ever opened. One survivor said bitterly, "They traded our lives for money. We were not consulted. We were not counted." 1970. Classrooms. Japanese textbooks omitted the words "comfort women." Lessons ended with battles and treaties. Students memorized dates, not faces. An entire generation grew up never hearing the truth. A historian observed, "History was not denied. It was never taught." 1974. Manila. Maria Rosa Henson raised her children in silence. She carried her story like a locked box. She would not open it until 1992, late 1970s. Tokyo. Researchers dug through defense agency archives. They found fragments, orders, ledgers, medical reports. The words resurfaced: compulsory, inspections, quotas. Proof that the system had been real. But newspapers ignored the findings. The country looked forward, not back. One Japanese scholar admitted, "The evidence was overwhelming. The audience was absent." The arithmetic of memory remained inverted. Hundreds of survivors still alive, thousands of pages in boxes, but silence louder than both. August 1991, Seoul. A press room filled with flashbulbs. An elderly woman sat at the front, hands trembling. She gave her name, Kim Hak-sun. For nearly 50 years, she had been silent. That day, she spoke. "I was taken by the Japanese Army when I was a girl. I was forced to serve as a comfort woman. I am here today to tell the truth." Her voice cracked. Reporters leaned forward, cameras flashed. The silence of half a century broke in a single sentence. Within weeks, more women stepped forward. By the end of 1991, 9 survivors had testified. By 1992, dozens. They told the same story. Abduction, deception, soldiers every day. 14, 15, 16 years old. One survivor recalled, "They told me I would sew uniforms. Instead, I was locked in a room. 10 men a day, sometimes more. January 1992. Seoul. Outside the Japanese embassy, women gathered in the snow. They held placards and shouted through megaphones. Students and priests stood beside them. Cars honked as they passed. It was the first Wednesday demonstration. A survivor declared, "We were silenced once. We will not be silenced again." The protests grew. Dozens became hundreds. By the late 1990s, thousands marched each week. Every Wednesday at noon, in rain or snow, the voices returned. Tokyo, 1992. Under pressure, the Japanese government admitted military involvement. Investigations uncovered defense agency orders, transport records, medical logs. The myth of voluntary prostitution collapsed under its own paperwork. 1993. Tokyo. The Kono Statement was issued. It admitted coercion. It admitted military responsibility. It offered sincere apologies. For survivors, it was words, not yet justice. A survivor answered, "We waited 50 years to hear this, but words alone cannot heal us." The arithmetic of testimony had shifted. From one voice came 9. From 9, dozens. From dozens, hundreds. What once was silence had become an archive of memory. 995. Tokyo. The Japanese government announced the Asian Women's Fund. Money raised through private donations, accompanied by a signed letter from the Prime Minister. Survivors received envelopes with cash and apologies. Some accepted, others refused. To them it was charity, not justice. A Korean survivor said, "I was taken by soldiers. Only the state can answer for that. Money without law is nothing." The debate split communities. Those who took the fund did so for survival. Those who refused did so for dignity. Neither found closure. 1996, Geneva. The United Nations Special Rapporteur Radhika Kumaraswamy issued her report. It called the system what it was, sexual slavery. It urged Japan to provide legal reparations. The words were blunt, the judgment clear. 1997, Manila. Maria Rosa Henson, the first Filipina survivor to speak, published her memoir, Comfort Woman, Slave of Destiny. Her story, abduction at 16, months in captivity, decades of silence, reached far beyond Asia. She wrote, "I speak not only for myself, but for the girls who never came home." 1998. The Hague. Scholars debated whether comfort stations constituted crimes against humanity. The precedents of Rwanda and Bosnia echoed. If wartime rape was a crime there, why not here? 2000. Tokyo. Survivors and activists organized the Women's International War Crimes Tribunal. It had no legal power, but the symbolism was sharp. Testimonies were heard, evidence presented, verdicts declared. The judgment. The Japanese government guilty of crimes against humanity. A survivor said before the panel, "I have waited 50 years to tell this in a court. Even if it is not official, the truth has been judged." By the end of the 1990s, the arithmetic of silence had reversed. From one voice in 1991 came hundreds of testimonies, dozens of lawsuits, international reports, and books in multiple languages. 2001. Washington, D.C. Survivors spoke before the U.S. Their voices shook, but their words were clear. Abduction, captivity, daily assaults. Lawmakers listened in silence. One congressman said, "Few testimonies in this hall have carried such weight." 2007. Washington. The House of Representatives passed Resolution 121. It urged Japan to formally acknowledge, apologize, and accept historical responsibility. The resolution was non-binding, but its moral force carried across oceans. Survivors celebrated. Tokyo protested. 2011 Seoul. Snow fell in front of the Japanese embassy. Candles flickered around a new statue. A bronze girl in hanbok, fists tight in her lap, bare feet on the stone. The 1000th Wednesday demonstration. Diplomats demanded its removal. Citizens refused. A survivor touched the statue's hand and whispered, "When I am gone, she will speak for me." 2012. Glendale, California. A bronze girl sat on a park bench, thousands of miles from Asia. Lawsuits followed. Judges dismissed them. The statue stayed. Memory had crossed the Pacific. 2015. Tokyo Seoul Agreement. Japan pledged WWII billion for a new foundation. Both governments declared the issue finally and irreversibly resolved. Survivors rejected it. One said, "They are negotiating our lives without us. We are still here." 2017. Berlin. Another statue unveiled. Japanese diplomats pressed for its removal. Local activists defended it. Survivors sent letters read aloud in German. The bronze girl became global. By the late 2010s, the arithmetic had shifted again. Hundreds of survivors in the 1990s. Dozens by 2010. Fewer than 20 by 2020. Each week, names read at protests. Each funeral, another warning. Time was running out. A student activist said, "They gave us their voices. Now we carry them." 2011. Seoul. Snow fell on the bronze girl in front of the Japanese embassy. Candles burned at her feet. Diplomats demanded she be removed. Citizens refused. The standoff became a symbol, memory against diplomacy. 2012, Glendale, California. Another statue appeared, this time in a suburban park. A girl in hanbok, seated, eyes steady. Lawsuits followed. Japanese nationalist groups tried to force its removal. American judges dismissed the case. The statue stayed. 2013. Tokyo. Politicians argued the women had been volunteers. Textbooks softened language. In some editions, the subject vanished altogether. Survivors protested. One said, "We were not prostitutes. We were children. We were taken." 2015 Tokyo Seoul Agreement. Japan pledged $1 billion for a new foundation. Both governments declared the issue finally and irreversibly resolved. Survivors in wheelchairs outside the embassy shook their heads. "We are alive. How can history be resolved without us?" 2017. Berlin. Another statue was unveiled. Japanese diplomats pressed for its removal. German activists defended it. Survivors too frail to travel sent letters. One message was read aloud. "I cannot stand there, but the statue can." 2018. Seoul. A South Korean court ruled Japan must compensate survivors directly. Tokyo refused to recognize the verdict, but the judgment carried weight. For the first time, a court had said plainly, justice owed, not charity. The arithmetic of survival was shrinking. Hundreds had spoken in the 1990s, dozens in the 2000s. Fewer than 20 remained alive. Yet statues multiplied, protests grew, and voices carried further than silence ever had. A student explained at a vigil, "The empire wanted them forgotten. We build statues so they cannot be." 2010s. The internet carried voices further than streets. Survivors who once spoke only in courtrooms or protests now appeared on screens. Interviews uploaded to YouTube showed women in their 80s and 90s, sitting at kitchen tables, voices trembling but steady. Subtitles spread their words across languages. One survivor said in a film testimony, "I was 16. They took me. I tell this so you will not forget." 2013. Seoul. Universities launched digital archives. Photographs of stations, copies of military orders, and hours of testimony were scanned and posted. Students no longer needed to search libraries. They could type a name and see faces, hear voices, read orders stamped with the imperial seal. 2015. Social media. Hashtags spread with each Wednesday protest. Photos of the bronze statue in front of the Japanese embassy went viral. Messages in English, Spanish, German appeared. Survivors' words crossed borders faster than diplomats could respond. A student activist explained, "Our grandmothers cannot travel, but their voices can." 2017. Tokyo. Revisionists published essays online claiming the women were volunteers. Within hours, counter-archives responded. Digital scans of contracts, diaries, interrogation reports proved otherwise. Screens became battlefields of memory. 2019. Seoul. The Korean Council launched an app with survivor stories. Users tapped screens to watch interviews, swiped through documents, listened to songs sung in camps. Memory had become interactive. The arithmetic of testimony changed again. One woman's story, filmed in a room, could be seen by millions. A single photograph shared online could spark rallies in Berlin, Manila, Los Angeles. Survivors who once whispered in interviews now reached classrooms and homes across continents. A survivor said in her final recorded message, "When I die, let my words live. Do not let silence return." 2020. Seoul. The Wednesday demonstration reached its 1,400th week. Survivors sat in wheelchairs, blankets over their knees. Some raised fists, others held microphones. Around them, students chanted. Behind them, the bronze statue sat silent, bare feet on stone. A survivor whispered into the microphone, "We are few, but we are still here." 2021. The pandemic. Streets emptied. Protests moved online. Live streams carried chants from Seoul to New York, Berlin, Manila. Survivors appeared on Zoom speaking from hospital beds, faces glowing on screens. Their voices cracked, but connection remained. 2022. Seoul. News spread. Only 11 registered survivors were still alive. Obituaries filled newspapers. Each week, a name was read aloud at the protest. Students carried portraits when voices could no longer answer. A student said, "We cannot replace them. We can only continue them." 2023. Tokyo. New textbooks softened language again. Words like forced disappeared, replaced with mobilized. Survivors groups protested. Activists smuggled copies of interrogation reports into classrooms, uploaded PDFs to student forums. Memory became an act of defiance. 2024. Berlin. Crowds gathered around the Bronze Girl. Flowers piled at her feet. Survivors had written letters read aloud in German. "We cannot travel, but let this statue speak for us." 2025. Seoul. Only a handful of survivors remained. Their testimonies had been recorded in every format: books, films, archives, apps. What began in silence had become one of the most documented crimes of the 20th century. The arithmetic of survival was almost over. Hundreds had spoken in the 1990s, dozens in the 2010s, fewer than 10 in the 2020s. But the arithmetic of memory grew larger. Statues in dozens of cities, digital archives in dozens of languages, millions of students learning names once erased. One of the last survivors said in her final interview, "When I die, do not close the book. Keep reading it aloud."